All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of El Abad Leila Latova, Baruch Marina Dubin, for dedicating the Shiur Midrashos this month in honor of their children, all of the suburban sons and daughters beginning their year of study in Eretz Yisrael. May their Torah study and mitzvos in the Holy Land merit the release of our precious hostages, the success of our soldiers, and return to their families in the arrival of Mashiach Sidkinu Mehira B'Yameinu. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Gabi and Shana Cohen, in commemoration of Gabi's grandmother, Eleanor Cohen, Elka Bas Binyamin Tzvi Zichron Lebracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. With that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Tzadik Ches 98. We are picking up on Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis 97b, and we left off 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. Boy Mini Rav Kahana Chamua Rav Misharshem Meirava. So Rav Kahana, that's the following shal of Rava. Chamar Chavaryon Mahu. What about the use of white wine? So just remember again, we were speaking about in yesterday's daf both the halachas of Nesachim as well as Hagafen. So what is the halacha regarding the use of white wine for libational purposes? So remember again, what that means is as follows. The Rashbam points out that obviously Rav Kahana did not hear the brisa that we talked about yesterday. Amrle al teri yain kiyis adam. So he goes over the pasuk indicates that wine is normally red, and therefore again, halacha l'maisa not to use red wine, not to use white wine for libational purposes. Now, as we saw already in yesterday's daf, the truth is, ideally, lachatchila, one should not use white wine. But if one did, the Gemara paskin writing yesterday's daf that b'diavad, it's okay. Okay, that's how we pass. Let's go back there. Kankanim b'sharon. So let's remember again, the last part of the Mishnah, previous Mishnah, was that if you purchase jugs from or casks from the Sharon, you accepted a breakage ratio of 10 per 100. So the Gemara says something very interesting. The Gemara says, Ta'ana pitzos naos umigufaros. So the Gemara points out over here, it doesn't literally mean broken. Because it will say, as Rashbam points out, is you're not really accepting any broken jugs. In other words, if I buy jugs from someone and ultimately some of them are broken, I want a refund for the broken ones. What this refers to is jugs that had a crack, and what they did in the Sharon is they would seal up the crack with some type of sulfur mixture. So you understood that you were going to have in every batch of 100, you were always going to have some that were repaired with this sealant, but not that were actually cracked and broken. Okay, incredible. Mishnah. So we'll say if I sell wine to my friend, so I sell wine to Ruvain, and after selling him the wine, it sours. What's the halacha? I don't have responsibility for that. Now, if I know that my wine sours quickly and I did not disclose that, then then I am chayv and achrayis. Then I do have a responsibility. So the Gemara says, good. And if I said to Ruvain, Yayin, top of Tzadik Ches 98a, Yayin mevusam ani mochalacha, chayv lahamid lo ad ha'atzeres. So this is very interesting. Now the Mishnah is going to say as follows. So if I go ahead and I say to Ruvain, I'm selling you Yayin mevusam. Now mevusam literally means fragrant. This represents almost like an aged wine. So if I tell him I'm selling you yain mevusam, that terminology means that it has to last up until Shavuos. In other words, I'm guaranteeing him that the wine that I'm selling him now is going to last through Shavuos. Now, what's unique about Shavuos? Rashbam says over here, avalo min ha'atzeres. Summertime, heat. So heat ruins wine. So the truth is, if I tell him I'm selling you yain mevusam, then ultimately what that means is I'm selling you wine that's going to last. When is it going to last until? I guarantee it'll last up until Shavuos, up until the summertime. V'yashan, what if I tell him I'm selling him aged wine? Mishal ishtakid. Then what this means is, look at the Rashbam, v'yashan, v'mochel el yain yashan, yitilo mishal ishtakid, shana akodemes, lezu, shanu omdim ba. So yain yashan, old wine means wine that has been aged at least a year. And again, I will say, remember, it's aged at least a year, but it's also got to be able to last, right, some amount of time going forward. The Gemara says, What happens if I sell them now miyushan, right? So there's yashan and miyushan. So yashan means we'll call it old wine, and miyushan means aged wine. If I sell them aged wine, ultimately again that has to be wine that has the ability to last for 3 years. So the way that Rashbam understands it is essentially it's 2 years old and has a shelf life of another year in front of it. Look at the Rashbam. Mishal shalosh shanim mishanat dekodim mishtakid, from the year before the last one, i.e. the wine is already 2 years old. So the wine itself is already 2 years old, plus current 1 year of window of consumption. Okay, now listen, obviously, when you see all of these terms, these are obviously, what's the right word? Societally relevant terms. In other words, what the Mishnah is espousing is, this is what Mavusa meant, this is what Yashan meant, this is what Miyushan meant. But obviously, this is going to differ societally and in different marketplaces. Good. Says the Gemara. So this is actually very interesting. So now, the Gemara says as follows, that halacha l'maisa, right, that when am I not chayiv and achrayis? I sell Ruvain wine and the wine sours. The Mishnah says I don't have responsibility. I don't have achrayis for that. Now Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina qualifies this halacha in a very dramatic way. He says that's only assuming that I've transferred the contents of the wine to Ruvain's utensils. So in other words, Ruvain showed up to buy wine from me. I took wine from my utensils in my store, and I poured it into his utensils. Then what happened? The wine went sour. So now Rabbi Yossi says, Ruvain has no recourse against me. I'm done, I'm out. But if let's say I sold Ruvain wine and I sold him the wine in my containers, so now he bought the wine in my jugs, in my wine containers. What's the halacha? So then Ruvain could claim mekachtos, because Ruvain can say, what's going on over here? This is your wine in your jugs, and it's spoiled. Now, obviously, this is all presupposing that Ruvain did not do anything negligent in the care of the wine. So, assuming that he did his part in the care of the wine, meanwhile, it's my wine, it's my jugs, he has the right to claim mekachtos. So, we'll say this is a very important qualification. So, Rabbi Yossi coming along and saying the only time that Ruvain can't claim mekachtos is if my wine was transferred into his jugs. But if halacha l'maisa, I sold him my wine in my jugs, so he has my wine in my jugs sitting in his house and it's spoiled, he has the right to come back and say, here's your wine, here's your jugs, give me back my money, mekachtos. The Gemara says, 1 second. So I'll say, but even if let's play this out. So let's say I sold Ruvain wine and it's in my jugs, right? So now everything is in the rishus of Ruvain. So why can't I say to him? Why can't I say to him? So I can say to Ruvain, I assume that when you bought the wine, you were going to drink it immediately. Why have you held on to it for a prolonged amount of time? In other words, even if it is my wine, obviously I sold it to him, and it's in my jugs, but at the end of the day, I could be like, Ruvain, again, it's a week later, it's 2 weeks later, why didn't you drink it already? Because what's the case? The case is where Ruvain said he was purchasing it for cooking purposes. For cooking purposes, so what happens when you have wine for cooking purposes? You use a little bit at a time. So this is very interesting. So now what Rabbi Yossi is highlighting over here is the following idea, that the case in our Mishnah, when I sold wine to Ruvain, and the wine sours, that Ruvain doesn't have recourse against me. What's the case where he doesn't have recourse against me? It's a case where I sell him the wine, but it's transferred into his own utensils. But if I sold Ruvain wine, and I sold him the wine, and it's still in my utensils, the cellar utensils, and he told me that he's using it for cooking, therefore again it's going to be slow use, and the wine sours due to no negligence on Ruvain's part, Ruvain can come back to me and claim mekachtos. He could come back to me and he could claim again fraudulent sale and demand the return of his money. Incredible. So why does Rabbi Yossi feel the need to set up our Mishnah as a case of dealing with the jugs of the purchaser, and ultimately that he's saying that he was buying it for cooking purposes. Why do that? Maybe it's a case of where maybe the Mishnah could be set up as a case of where I sold Reuven the wine. It's still in my utensils, but he never mentioned anything to me about use for cooking. So Rabbi say, in the absence of mentioning cooking, I assume why is Reuven buying the wine? Why? To drink it. And when is he buying it to drink? Now. So the Gemara says, Amrava masnisin kashise, because Rabbi Yossi had a difficulty with the Mishnah. Always has difficulty with the Mishnah. Diktani im yadua sheyeno machmitz hareze mekachtos. Because we'll say ultimately the Mishnah said, if I the seller, if I know that my wine has a tendency to spoil, this is a mekachtos. But amai leimolei loy bay lechalashouye. Why don't I say to Reuven, you should not have kept it for a long time? In other words, even if I know that my wine has a propensity to sour, here's what Rabbi says: at the time that I'm selling it to Reuven, what's the status of the wine? Totally good. So now Reuven comes back and he says, you know what? I didn't even drink it. It's a couple of days later and it's spoiled. Why can't I say back to Reuven? Well, why did you wait? Why did you wait? In other words, wine, you buy wine to drink. You don't buy wine to hold. And that's societally. So the Gemara says, "Alalav shmamina damar le'mikveh." So it has to be that the case in the Mishnah is where Reuven made it clear to me that he in fact is buying the wine for cooking purposes. So now that I know that he's buying it for cooking purposes, I know that he's going to hold on to it for a prolonged amount of time. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, if my wine does have a tendency to spoil, then Reuven could claim mekachtos. So therefore, what comes out? So Rabbi Yossi's shita is as follows. So Rabbi Yossi, so there's a couple of cases unfolding over here. In general, if I go ahead and I sell Reuven wine, right, and I transfer it into his utensils, right, then there's no mekachtos. No mekachtos. The wine goes bad. Sorry, Reuven, that's your problem. That's your problem. The only exception to that rule is if I know that I have wine that spoils quickly, again, so then halacha l'maisa, and I know that Reuven is going ahead and using it for cooking purposes, then I have an obligation to disclose. Failure to disclose is grounds for mekachtos. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. Now this whole idea of mekachtos by wine, right, is that Rabbi Yossi is espousing, that especially if I know that my wine sours quickly, this whole thing argues on Rabbi Yosef. Also, this is incredible. Rabbi Yosef, chamra mazla de mori garim. So this is incredible. We saw this before. That ultimately Rabbi Yosef holds that the status of your wine is absolutely dependent on your mazel. In other words, that once I sell wine to Reuven, whether the wine keeps or the wine spoils, that's on the owner. That's on the owner, right? That's your mazel. That's part of your mazel. Shneimar v'af ki hayayin boged gever yoher. So I said this is incredible because the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Habakkuk, right? And the pasuk says, even wine will rebel against the arrogant man. So I'll say, so get ready for this. The Gemara seems to indicate over here that Allah Chalamaysa, spoiled wine is indicative of arrogance of the owner. Right? The idea is that if your wine turns, that could be a musar from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that maybe I'm operating with a bit too much gaiva. Now, to be clear, it doesn't have to mean gaiva. It doesn't have to mean arrogance. But what Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef is trying to convey over here is, once you buy wine, it's on you. Right? And I will say it's interesting, but what's driving this? Wine is a very fickle thing, right? In other words, sometimes, sometimes you could have a bottle of wine that you're very much looking forward to. You open it up and it turns. And it's not necessarily, again, you don't know why this turned, why this didn't turn, right? How it opens up, all these different things. So wine. So Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef holds that in general, the status of wine is very much tethered to the mazel of its owner. To the mazel of its owner. And I will say, now by the way, it's actually quite interesting because wine itself in general also has a tremendous connection to Kedusha, right? There's no davar shebekdusha that doesn't require wine. Bris Milah requires wine. Wedding requires wine. Kiddush requires wine. It used to be, remember we saw this in Daf Yomi, even Avelos used to require wine, right? When Avelim would come back from the Levaya, the first thing they'd give them was the koshel tanchum, the cup of consolation, like the Avelos big gulp. It was like a big glass of wine, in order to be able to help take the edge off some of the pain. So wine is inherently tethered with every davar shebekdusha. So it's almost as if you see this incredible connection between wine and the spiritual status of the owner. Right? That's what it means when it says your mazel. Your mazel is not like some type of hocus pocus type of thing. It means that the status of your wine almost is tethered to your ruchnius. If your ruchnius is in a good place, so ultimately your wine will be in a good place. And if your ruchnius is not in a good place, then the wine almost becomes a spiritual barometer of where it is that you are holding. A fascinating idea. It's almost as if the Rimon Shalom, we've spoken on this many times very quickly, that this is why Klal Yisrael didn't like the mun, right? Klal Yisrael complained about the mun in the deserts. The notion of complaining about mun seems to be so ridiculously counterintuitive. But if you understand that mun was a spiritual barometer, because remember, depending on where you were holding in your ruchnius, that determined the location in which your mun fell. If you were righteous, your mun fell at your doorstep. Struggling a little bit, mun fell at the end of the walk. Really in trouble, the mun fell, in front of someone else's house. In other words, so that you had an immediate spiritual barometer every single day. People don't like to live like that. As much as we say, I wish I knew how Hashem really felt about me, it's not really true. It's not really true. Now, it happens to be, we know how HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels about us. He loves us. He loves us. But the truth is, do I want like a daily performance report? We say we do, but the truth is, to get that daily divine feedback is not the easiest thing. That's what our ancestors got in the desert in the form of mun. But it's interesting that Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef seems to feel that wine has that type of spiritual progress report. How your wine is very much indicative of maybe where you're holding in your ruchni. It's really incredible. So the Gemara tells us as follows. The Gemara says, Shneimar Gveria, good. The Gemara says, Hi man diyar. So thank you. Aramari. So we'll say now that the Gemara spoke about gaiva, the Gemara says if someone is arrogant, Hi man diyar, afilu ainshe beisi lo mekabel. He has difficulty even with the people of his household. And I will say, this is an incredible, incredible thing. If a person has a problem with gaiva, he has difficulty, we all know that a Baal gaiva has difficulty getting along with other people. But if a person has gaiva, he'll have difficulty getting along even with his own family. Now, specifically his wife, but in Shibesi also means even his kids. I will say this is such a profound Gemara. Shneimar, Gever Yoyer v'lo Yinove. My lo Yinove. What does lo Yinove mean? So the Gemara says, B'nove Shalo. Nove Shalo means his domicile, his home. That ultimately, if somebody is arrogant, lo Yinove, he won't even be able to get along with his spouse. And I will say this is an incredibly important yesod. If a person has struggles with shalom bayis, person has struggles with relating to his children. So sometimes where there is relationship conflict, it might be other people. But sometimes it's me. And it's so incredibly important to be able to look in the mirror. I will say this is the season, learning this Gemara 2 days before Rosh Hashanah. The Yom Noraim are all about relationships. First it starts out with relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then it goes into relationship ultimately again with people who we love and people we interact with. And it's so important, sons, when we have relationship conflict, a husband and wife, they're not getting along, a father, a mother having difficulty with children. It is so easy to always point the finger at someone else. But when you find yourself in the midst of relationship conflict, the first place to start is to introspect, is to look inward. Because the Gemara says a lot of times where there is conflict, it's because I'm a Baal Gaiva. Because I'm a Baal Gaiva, because I am not operating correctly in this marriage, because I'm not operating correctly with my children. Sometimes it's not someone else. Like the famous Rabbi Nachman, right? Rabbi Nachman says, when you point one finger at someone else, right, there's 3 more pointing back. And Rabbi says 4, but I guess he held his thumb in a different way. Right? In other words, right, there's three fingers pointing back at me. And we have to introspect when things aren't going right. The natural tendency is to assign blame and to deflect. But the reality is 9 out of 10 times when something's not going right in a major relationship in my life, I am playing a role in that. So the Gemara says, if I'm a Baal Gaiva, the first place that's going to come out is in my marriage. So incredible, so incredible. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Kala miskavet hashal tamid chacham, bein lo tamid chacham, ein machnisin also b'mechitzas shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's a very profound Gemara. Whoever literally again makes himself arrogant by wearing the clothing of a tamid chacham, but is not really a tamid chacham. In other words, so this is someone who plays the part of a Talmid Chacham, but is not a Talmid Chacham. He is not brought into the Mechitza, not brought into the inner sanctum of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Olam Haba. Ksiv hacha v'lo yinav, ksiv hasam al nevei kodshecha. So we'll say, so what does this mean? So this refers to a person who pretends that he's something that he's not. So a person who pretends that he has earned the kavod of Torah and demands that kavod. So the Rebbe Shalom says, okay, you want the kavod, take the kavod. But I'm just telling you, you're going to get all the kavod in this world and none of the kavod in the world to come. A very profound idea. Also, highlighting this, I'll say, so often we go through life and we put on an image of someone who we're not. And the image is great, klapei chotz, it's fine. The world thinks we're a certain way. But internally, we know who we are, I know who I am, and what I'm not. So part of the beauty of the Yomim Noran is an opportunity to kind of stop putting all the effort projecting an image of what I'm not, and to start really embracing and leaning into who I am, and start perfecting that persona. So much time is spent on false images, and so much time is spent on smoke screens, and it's exhausting, and it's overwhelming, and chances are at some point in time anyway, people see through it. Instead, let me figure out who I really am, and let me build a better me. Build a better me, because if I don't, and I spend a life pretending, that even if you manage to pull it off for 120, at the end of the day, it catches up with me in Olam Haba. Such a profound Gemara. Amar Rava, Haiman dezabin, first wide line, Haiman dezabin lechavisa dechamra lechanua adaita lesabuye v'takiv apal goatil. So it's a very interesting case. I go ahead and I sell a barrel of wine to a shopkeeper. Now here's the way this arrangement works, right? I'm a wholesaler, so, or a producer for that matter. Okay, I'm a producer. So what do? I give my barrel of wine to Reuven. Reuven has a shop, I give him my wine, and the arrangement is Reuven's going to sell off the wine, and he's going to pay me a fee when he finishes the barrel. Now what does that fee represent? That fee represents, again, the cost of the barrel, whatever it is, whatever, let's say it's $1,000 for the barrel, and obviously Reuven's selling it off in a way that he's turning a profit. But whatever his profit is, I don't care about what his profit is. But the arrangement is, but he's not paying me until he finishes selling the complete barrel. Now what ends up happening? The barrel goes bad halfway or a third of the way through. So who's responsible for this? Dinuhu tebekabel emine. So we'll say halacha l'maisa. So Reuven doesn't bear any of that loss, right? That loss is all on me, which makes sense because Reuven is really just my shaliach. Really, the way the Gemara looks at this case over here is that Reuven is selling the wine on my behalf. So shlucho shel adam kimo. So he's my shaliach. So because of that, I, the owner of the barrel, right? We'll call it the producer, the wholesaler. So I bear complete responsibility. So if the wine goes bad, it's on me. This is also assuming that Reuven did not move the spigot. In other words, the way the Rashbam points out over here is Reuven would get a barrel. Now again, remember, Reuven's not paying me any money when he gets the barrel from me. He pays me the money at the end when he finishes selling the wine in the barrel. Now the way this worked is there was a barrel and there was a spigot in the bottom, and they take the wine. So when do we say that I am responsible for the loss and Reuven has no responsibility? When he did not move the location of the spigot. But if he moved the location, then that affects the quality of the wine, then he would be chayav for any type of spoilage. Okay? Furthermore, he's only talking about where the market day place, the marketplace day. Where the market day didn't yet come. But if the market day came already, Reuven is expected to move the merchandise. If he did not move the merchandise and then it's spoiled, ultimately the responsibility is his. Rava says as follows: Haiman de kabel chamra adaite de mati le parafta devol shafat. So another case, I go ahead and I give Reuven a barrel. Now there happens to be that Rashbam points out over here that this is a case of an iska arrangement. Remember again, I've also spoken about iska a number of times, started in Ezehu Neshach, essentially again where we share. I give the barrel to Reuven, and we're sharing in losses and profits equally. That's what we're doing. But halacha l'maisa, again, remember, this is where part of the principle is viewed as a loan and part of the principle is viewed as a deposit. Again, without even getting into the technicalities of that right now, this case is unique because I give Ruvain the barrel and I say, Ruvain, here's the deal. Go, sell the barrel, sell the contents, but I need you to sell it in the port of Val Shafat. So in other words, I'm requiring Ruvain to go a particular place to sell the wine there. To sell the wine there. Happens to be, because everyone knows in the port of Val Shafat, that's the name of the place, the wine commands a very high price. Va'adimati hasam zal. Now by the time Ruvain got to Val Shafat, the price of wine plummeted, and as a result, again, there was a loss. So that's halacha. Dinhu debekabale. So ultimately, once again, I have to accept full responsibility for the loss. Now both say, now why do I have to accept full responsibility for the loss? Why is that? Because I tied Ruvain's hands. Because essentially I said, Ruvain, you could sell it in one place, Val Shafat, and nowhere else. So if I'm limiting him in that way, that I can only sell it in one area, then halacha l'maisa again, he has to bear the loss. I'm sorry, I, the owner of the barrel, have to bear the loss. What happens if both say in the same case of Val Shafat, and I told Ruvain, go sell it in Baal Shafat, and by the time he gets to Baal Shafat, it turned to vinegar. What happens in that case? So Amarli Rav Hillel Rav Ashi, Ki havan beRav Kahana Amarlan Chala Lo Udulok Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. So again, if it's vinegar, no. If it's vinegar, then ultimately again Reuven and I are going to share the losses the same way, and not like Rabbi Yossi. Others say no. I even accept responsibility for if it turns to vinegar. Kiman, in accordance with whose opinion? Ultimately, again, like Rabbi Yossi. Like Rabbi Yossi. If you look at the last Rashbam, look Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. That ultimately, again, chalalo. So again, says, you hear the shiloh over here. If it goes ahead and it turns to vinegar, so do we say that because I tied Ruvain's hands to go to Val Shafat, that I still take full responsibility or not? So there's two gears sauce over here. According to the first approach, ultimately, again, if it turns to vinegar, I do not accept full responsibility. We share the loss, and that's not in accordance with the position of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. Or the second approach is no, we do share the loss. I do accept the loss fully as the owner of the barrel in accordance with the position of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Okay, Yashan Mishalish Takid. So we'll say, so remember again, the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa again, if I sell, depending on what I call the wine that I'm selling. So if I tell Reuven I'm selling you, we'll call it old wine. Just use the word old. Yashan. So what does Yashan mean? The wine is a year old. The wine is a year old. So we'll say Amud Beis. So Tana umiyashin v'holech ad hachag. That ultimately again, what is miyashin? Miyashin means that take a look at the Rashbam. Tana heichad amar miyushan tzarich sheyehei shel gimel shanim shlemos v'sheiskayim v'yisyashin ad gamar shana shlishis zudanu ad hachag. The Gemara just skips. If I tell him I'm selling him miyashin wine, aged wine, what does aged wine means? Aged wine means it's 3 years old, and 3 years old means that it could last up until the sukkahs of the year that I'm selling it to him. Okay, I will say these are just the definitions of what they call these different wines. Mishnah, Hamokim Macham Lechavero. Let's go. I sell a makom, right, to my friend. So listen to this. I sell a place. I sell a plot of land. A lot. Right? I sell a lot of land to my friend, or for that matter, again, I'm makabel a lot of land. And again, let's say the land. I'm explicit, right? Reuven wants to buy land from me, and he says, "I'm buying this land to buy a beis chasnos for my son." What is beis chasnos for my son? Reuven says, "My son got married. As we'll see, the Gemara says it was customary for the father to go ahead and build a small house for his son and his daughter-in-law to live in. So Reuven says, I'm buying this lot of land to build a marriage house for my son, a first house for my son, or based on monas libito. Or Reuven says, unfortunately, again, my daughter was widowed, and again, she's moving back home, and I'm building a small house for her. So in this case over here, the buyer is explicit. The buyer is explicit about what he plans on doing with a lot of land. Now, Interestingly enough, what's missing from this transaction? the dimensions of the land that Reuven is buying. So he tells me what he's buying it for, but he doesn't. But we never discuss dimensions of the land. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, "Bona arba amos al sheish div Rabbi Akiva." Rabbi Akiva says ultimately again, it has to be an area where we're able to build a home that is 4 amos by 6 amos. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. I both say 4 amos by 6 amos is tiny. Mamish, the first tiny house, a real tiny house over here. Right? So Rabbi Akiva says that's the dimension. So again, in the absence of anything specific, that's going to be the dimensions. Rabbi Shmuel says, Refes Bakar Hizo. Rabbi Shmuel says that's not a house, that's a stable. That's a stable, right? That's a barn. That's a barn. It doesn't make any sense. First white line. Harotz Elasas Refes Bakar. I suppose say, so what happens if Reuven and I get into an arrangement, right? And I say to Reuven, right? Reuven wants to purchase from me services to buy a barn. Then what's the halacha? And again, I was saying all of these cases, what's articulated is the use. What's not articulated are the dimensions. So the shaila is, in the absence of articulated dimensions, almost what's the default? So now let's say again, we contract to build a barn, right? I'm going to build Reuven a barn. So what's the halacha? And we don't talk about dimensions. Bona dalet amos al sheish. So a barn or a stable means 4 amos by 6 amos. Bayis katan. I contract with Reuven to build a small house. What's the definition of a small house? Sheish al ches. 6 amos by 8 amos. Godol. I contract to build a large home. Ches al eser. 8 amos by 10 amos. Traklin, now we'll discuss what a traklin is. Yud al yud, 10 amos by 10 amos. And they're both saying in all of these cases, rumo kechatzi arko kechatzi rachbo. Ultimately, the height of any structure is the equivalent of 1/2 of its length plus 1/2 of its width. We've seen this concept before. Rayi l'davar. They both say, what's the proof to this? Rabbi Shmuel Silber can begin a hechel, like the height of the entryway to the Beis Hamikdash, right? Which was 30 amos tall, which because it was 40 amos in length, 20 amos in width. So again, half of each of those represents a 30 amma height. We'll see that more in the Gemara. So the Gemara said, so remember again, the Mishnah began by saying, I contract with Reuven to go ahead and build a home. Lasos by, right? So the lashon of the Mishnah was a marriage house for a son or a widow house for his daughter. The Gemara says, why are you writing it like that? Why didn't you just write a marriage house or a widow house? So in other words, let it just say beis chasnos libno beis lisni beis chasnos libno ulabito beis amonos libno ulabito. In other words, just say a marriage house for his son or his daughter, right? A widow house for his son, for his daughter, for his son or his daughter. In other words, why? In other words, we're saying like specifically, a marriage house for a son and a widow house for his daughter. Why? Why are you framing it like that? To which the Gemara said, so I'll say ultimately again, because the Mishnah is highlighting just a normative practice, and the normative practice is that a son-in-law should not live by his mother-in-law's house. Right? That ultimately, again, so therefore, who was normally building a house for the new couple? It was the father of the chassan, the father of the groom, right? The father of the groom, because a son and a daughter-in-law would commonly live by the son's parents, right? They would live by the groom's parents and not by the bride's parents. What's going on over here? Well, so take a look at the Rashbam, 4 lines into the white lines. That sometimes a person has to be careful about one's wife and his son-in-law. So the Gemara says, sometimes because of an immoral relationship, sometimes ultimately again because the mother-in-law may spend money too freely on her son-in-law. So therefore again, obviously probably a lot of this also reflecting the fact that families often lived very close together. But Lamaisa, again, the idea being that halacha Lamaisa, the son-in-law will not live in the same house as his mother-in-law, or even in close proximity to his mother-in-law. So therefore, again, the Mishnah just highlights over here that halacha l'maisa, you would go ahead and it would be normal for the father to build a house, a beis chasnos, for his son. Similarly, again, if a daughter was widowed, it would be common for her to move back with her parents. So all the Mishnah is highlighting over here is just common ways that people operated. So it would be normal for a son, married son, to live by his parents, not to live by his in-laws. Why? Because a son-in-law should not live in close proximity to his mother-in-law. By the way, there are many other valid reasons for that as well, right? Even aside from the highlighted ideas over here, right? Lamaisa, so Lamaisa again. So, and by widow, it would be common halacha Lamaisa for the widowed daughter to go back and live by her parents. The Gemara says, "Kedichsib b'sefer ben Sira." An incredible Gemara over here, as it is written in the Sefer ben Sira. Kol shakal v'kaf ma'aznayim. I have measured everything in the scales, and I've come to see. V'lomatzasi kal misubin. The lightest item, the item that weighs the least is bran. Bran weighs very little. The kal misubin, what's even lighter than bran? Chasan hadar bebeis chamav, a son-in-law who lives by his in-laws. In other words, we'll say light, meaning that such a person doesn't have any spiritual weight. Such a person, again, is clearly doesn't understand the gravity of his actions. The kal michasan, he'll say, is incredible. What's even worse than a chasan who lives by his in-laws? Oreach machnis oreach. When a guest invites a guest. If you're a guest at someone's home, and then you invite someone to join you, right? So you're a guest who invites a guest, it's just such a lack of proper midos. So just like a son-in-law who lives by his in-laws, again, putting himself in a situation that halacha says is not a good one. So a guest who invites a guest, just a fundamental lack of midos. The kame oreach, this is incredible. And who's even less than a guest who invites a guest? Meishiv davar b'terin yishma, someone who speaks before he finished listening. That's incredible. Someone who answers before he's even listening. I'll say, in other words, that people sometimes we're so eager. There's an article yesterday in yesterday's Wall Street Journal about this, about the power of silence. That we have such a need to go ahead and give answers, such a need to retort, such a need to talk, such a need to fill awkward silences. And meanwhile, it was a fascinating article just about the profundity of silence on multiple levels. But the idea of answering before you've even heard what the other person has to say. It's so nonsensical. It's literally, again, if bran is the lightest, lighter than that is the person who lives by his in-laws. Lighter than that, ultimately, is the guest who goes ahead. And light means like you don't have any standing, you don't have any weight to you, you don't have any depth to you. Is the guest who invites the guest. And lighter than that is a person who talks even before listening what the other person has to say. Shnei amar meishiv davar v'teren yishma iveles huilo ukalima. That literally, again, one who goes ahead and answers something before he has heard. Ultimately, iveles hilo. Such a person is a transgression for that person, uklima, and it's a degradation. I will say, we'll have to stop over here. We'll pick up Emir Hashem at the 2 dots. Emir Hashem, I think that the schedule is going to be, stay tuned, but I think what we're going to be doing is tomorrow's daf is going to take place tonight, Emir Hashem, because Slichos begins tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. So tentatively, Shir is tonight at 8 o'clock. So tomorrow morning's daf, Emir Hashem, will be done tonight at 8 o'clock, but I'll confirm it on the WhatsApp chat. And Emir Hashem, that way again, we don't have to rush the Slichos tomorrow morning. Shkoyach, everyone. Oh, over here.